Is climate change real?
As far as I know, climate change is real, and we are contributing an awful lot to it.
Is carbon tax the best way to address that?
If the way you want to address it is to reduce the amount of carbon you're emitting, then yes, it is by far the most efficient way of doing it. We've known for many, many centuries that the more expensive things are, the less people tend to use them, to the extent that they're able to use less. By just incorporating it into everything that we do every day, it makes it just the simplest way to do it. It incentivizes industry to emit less, it incentivizes consumers to emit less, it incentivizes everyone along that chain to emit less.
Is it masquerading as just another tax?
Well, it can, and unfortunately for proponents in Canada, it has. The British Columbia carbon tax has often been held up as one of the most effective, and that's fair enough, except that it's not revenue neutral anymore, which means that when it started out, the idea was taxpayers wouldn't be out of pocket. The government would be taking the same pie of money, so to speak. They would just be taking a slice now from carbon and a correspondingly smaller slice from other things. It's not that way anymore. Revenues to the government exceed the money that the consumers get back. And then Ontario, we know cap and trade, which the new government has canceled. The idea behind cap and trade was that the revenue was supposed to fund all sorts of environmental programs, so that was a kind of revenue neutrality. But we know now, the Auditor General just recently tallied up the costs of canceling it, and we know that program was bringing in much more money than was going out. So it's a tax grab if it's a tax grab. It's not a tax grab if it's not a tax grab. Basically, the government just has to, if it wants to say that it's revenue neutral and it's not a tax grab, then it just has to do it. It just has to cut cut income tax by the same amount that it increases carbon tax, or else, as the federal government is doing, just basically, literally or figuratively, hand people a check.
Right, but it's more so revenue cycling with these climate action incentive payments. So I guess when you work out the math, and I don't know specifically, but broadly, when you work out that math, on a per household basis, on an average per household basis, what you will be paying into it is, a few dollars more you'll be getting back. So it's virtually a wash.
It should be a wash, and that won't be true for every single household, obviously. This is on average. Revenue neutrality is basically saying that the government will take in the same amount as it gives out. Not every single family will end up whole at the end of it, and obviously, depending on your lifestyle, it's going to be easier for you to avoid big carbon expenditures like gasoline and heating oil and things like that. But the government has put in these incentives, or the government has put in certain allowances for people who live in rural areas and stuff, which kind of makes it a little more politically palatable. But yeah, there is this idea, which then opens them up to, ironically, to this other charge that they're basically trying to buy people's votes with their own money. And in fact, people will be getting back their rebates basically at the same moment they start spending the carbon tax kicks in. So they'll be getting that first check, so to speak, right when they start paying the carbon tax, more or less. So, I mean, the virtue of it is that it's measurable. We'll know long before the election, or economists will be able to look and say, well, is the government actually doing what it says it's going to do? But then you have to trust that the government is going to keep doing that, and not just say, well, you know what, we kind of need some more money, and maybe we'll just stop sending out these checks. There's no telling what governments are going to do in the future.
So I'm going to borrow some language from you that you just used, politically palatable, because not everybody thinks it is. Ontario's Premier Doug Ford, Saskatchewan's Premier Scott Moe, Alberta's opposition leader Jason Kenney, they're not all on this same page, and they seem to think, along with the federal opposition leader Andrew Scheer, that this is just a ploy in the election for the federal Liberal Party.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's fair to say it's just a ploy. I mean, it's always easier not to bring in a tax than to bring in a tax. And there was no sure thing as all this opposition started ramping up. It was no sure thing that the federal Liberals, would go through with it. And one valid criticism, of course, is at $20 a ton, which is where the carbon tax is, it's not going to come anywhere close to meeting the targets that the Liberals keep saying we're going to meet. So, there are various different ways to attack the project, to attack this tax, and clearly, these conservative leaders who are, united against it seem to think, I think with some reason that you can't go wrong fighting a new tax. The Liberals are pretty popular. Liberals are in a pretty comfortable position in the polls. They don't have a ton of seats to lose in Alberta and Saskatchewan. Ontario, to me, is the real battleground. How much purchase can Doug Ford, how much opposition can Doug Ford whip up, and how much can he then sort of transfer over to the federal Conservatives? One of the confounding things about this, from a small C conservative point of view, is that the carbon tax is easy. Well, carbon tax or cap and trade are so obviously the preferred methods from a conservative point of view to try and get these things done. Conservatives believe in market forces. They believe in price effects. But now you have Ford and Moe and Scheer who keep saying they'll table a plan, but they haven't. And that's absolutely a valid criticism coming back in the other direction, because whatever plan they do come up with is by definition going to be more complex than a carbon tax. So it's a huge issue among super partisan conservatives, the kind of partisan conservatives who vote in leadership contests. Is it a huge issue one way or the other among actual voters? I suspect not. I just don't know if that's going to work to the Liberals' advantage, where a couple $100 a year is just not going to get people that excited one way or the other, or if it's going to work to Conservatives' advantage in that they do think that it's a tax grab and they don't care what the Conservatives are going to do about climate change, so they might as well keep that $200 in their pocket. I don't know how it's going to work out. This is the first time really that a sitting government has ever tried to do something like this. The last time the Liberal Party tried to run on climate change, it was a historic disaster under Stéphane Dion. But this is a much simpler plan, and Justin Trudeau is a much better politician than Stéphane Dion is.